The desert does not forgive. In Burkina Faso, where the wind howls across endless dunes and even grass refuses to survive, a young leader dared to plant hope. They called it madness. They called it impossible. How could bare sand become a garden? How could death give way to life? When Ibrahim Traoré took the helm of this landlocked nation, he faced a truth as stark as the sun above the Sahara. Every year, thousands of acres were swallowed by advancing desert. If nothing changed, the children of tomorrow would inherit hunger instead of harvest. The world expected silence. Instead, Traoré raised his voice. He turned survival into a national mission. He turned despair into duty. This story is not only about trees, it is about dignity. It is about a country that chose to fight the sands of time with calloused hands, sweat-drenched brows, and an idea the world had never seen before. Stay with us. What follows is more than survival. It is a blueprint for the future. Subscribe and walk with us. In the beginning, there was sand, waves of it, stretching from horizon to horizon, shifting with the wind like a sea that swallowed everything in its path. Burkina Faso had lived in the shadow of this desert for generations. And by the time Ibrahim Traoré rose to lead, the sands had grown bolder. Each year, thousands of acres of farmland were claimed, leaving villages emptier, harvests thinner, and futures more uncertain. Traoré did not inherit a nation of abundance. He inherited a battlefield, one where the enemy was invisible, but relentless. He knew that to secure the dignity of his people, he could not wait for charity or aid. He would have to summon strength from within, turn the land itself into a weapon of resistance. His answer came not in speeches, but in action. He declared a nationwide campaign of trees. It began as an obligation, then became a movement. Every citizen, rich or poor, young or old, was asked to plant. Weddings were celebrated with seedlings, birthdays marked with saplings, and festivals adorned with rows of green that promised shade for generations not yet born. Across dusty villages, families carried water jars and small trees, walking towards the edge of the desert as if they were marching into battle. At first, it was a triumph. Photographs captured entire hillsides dotted with fresh green, the sound of children laughing as they patted soil over fragile roots. Hope spread like fire. For the first time in memory, the desert seemed to retreat. Burkina Faso was alive with the rhythm of hands planting, of feet trampling sand to make way for life. But the desert is cunning. Its winds arrived with vengeance, sweeping away saplings before they could anchor themselves. Storms tore young trees from the ground, leaving only scars where roots had tried to cling. The soil itself betrayed them, thin, lifeless, unable to feed what had been planted. Farmers watched as the green they had nurtured turned brown, then gray, then dust once more. Within a few years, most of the millions of trees were gone. The disappointment was crushing. People whispered that the effort was wasted, that no matter how many hands dug into the sand, nature would not bend. International observers smirked. They called it naive, even foolish, to imagine that a poor nation could outwit the Sahara. And yet, Ibrahim Traoré did not retreat. He looked upon the barren fields, the withered stalks, and declared that failure was not the end. The wounds of our land are great, he told his people, so the cure must also be great. To him, the dead plants were not proof of defeat. They were proof of resilience waiting to be reborn. The nation stood at a crossroads, abandon the dream or find a new way to fight. What came next would shock not only Burkina Faso, but the world itself. When the last of the saplings withered beneath the desert winds, most would have accepted defeat. But Ibrahim Traoré chose to look at death and see life. His mind turned to the stalks left behind after harvest. The dry husks, the brittle stems, the thousands of tons of straw that farmers usually burned or discarded. To others, they were waste. To him, they were armor. His vision was deceptively simple. If living plants could not withstand the fury of the desert, perhaps dead ones could shield the soil long enough for life to take root. He ordered that straw and stalks be gathered, laid across the sand in careful patterns, squares like a giant chessboard stretching across the horizon. Within each square, seeds were sown, hardy species capable of enduring heat and thirst. The straw would rot into fertilizer, but more importantly, it would hold the sand in place, break the wind, and shield the tender shoots. At first, many mocked the plan. Journalists scoffed, "How can dead plants bring life?" Villagers shook their heads, saying it was madness. And yet, lines of workers began their march into the desert. Under the blazing sun, men and women knelt in the sand, arranging stalks with blistered hands. From a distance, it looked like a golden net unfurled across the dunes. Sweat dripped, backs ached, but the work continued, day after day, square after square, as if the people of Burkina Faso were weaving their future into the soil itself. Months passed, then years. Slowly, the miracle unfolded. Where the wind had once screamed unchallenged, its voice was silenced. 99% of the sandstorm's power was broken, their claws trapped in the straw lattice. Where the soil had been lifeless, now compost from decaying stalks enriched it, darkening the sand, feeding the seeds. Shoots emerged, first timid, then bold. Green began to pierce the gold of the desert. The reaction was nothing short of astonishment. Farmers who had lost hope watched fields blossom once more. Children who had grown up thinking grass was a myth now chased each other through patches of pasture. Villages where hunger had been normal began to believe in abundance again. And in the cities, people spoke of Traoré not merely as a leader, but as a man who had bent the desert. Beyond the borders of Burkina Faso, experts took notice. Environmental scientists flew in, expecting to document another failed experiment. Instead, they found thriving ecosystems where death had reigned. Reports spoke of the desert's advance halted, of plant survival rates multiplied, of infrastructure saved from burial beneath dunes. International organizations, once dismissive, now pointed to Burkina Faso as proof that ingenuity could outwit climate disaster. The emotional shift was profound. What began in ridicule ended in reverence. Traoré had taken the symbols of failure, dead plants, broken stalks, and turned them into the foundation of victory. He had shown his people that even waste could hold the seed of dignity. But questions remained. Could this fragile triumph endure the test of time? Could Burkina Faso truly turn a miracle into permanence? The world was watching, waiting to see if the green squares on the sand would become the roots of a revolution. The desert had always been more than a landscape. It was an adversary that shaped the rhythm of life, dictating when crops would fail, when families would leave, when hunger would gnaw at entire villages. Yet as the squares of straw took hold and the seeds grew stronger, the rhythm began to change. For the first time in decades, the soil of Burkina Faso was breathing again. Farmers returned to fields they had long abandoned. Where once they dug into dust and despair, they now pulled roots from darkened earth enriched by compost. Yields increased, not to the level of abundance seen in fertile river valleys, but enough to feed families, enough to restore confidence. Markets once bare began to carry grains, vegetables, and fruits. The whisper of scarcity gave way to the murmur of trade. This change rippled through daily life. Children who had grown used to empty plates saw their first bowls filled. Schools in rural areas, once deserted during planting seasons, filled with pupils again as households balanced food security with education. Women, often the first to suffer when harvest failed, became leaders in community planting drives, their hands as much a part of the land's recovery as any government decree. The political effect was immediate. In a country long accustomed to disappointment, Ibrahim Traoré stood apart. He was no longer just the man who issued orders from the capital. He became the face of survival, the embodiment of resilience. His speeches were not abstract promises, but reflections of what people saw with their own eyes. Sand held back, crops sprouting, children laughing. It was here that international observers began to draw parallels between his leadership and moments of upheaval in Africa's past. They noted that the Ibrahim Traoré coup was not merely a transfer of power, but a turning of the tide, not against political opponents alone, but against nature itself. His legitimacy was not written only in constitutions or declarations, but in the very soil that once resisted him. Economically, the benefits grew clearer with each passing season. By slowing desertification, Burkina Faso reduced its reliance on food imports. Grain that once traveled across borders at high costs now sprouted from within. This shift did not make the nation wealthy, but it provided something even more vital: sovereignty over sustenance. Every harvested field was a quiet declaration of independence. Socially, the campaign forged unity in a nation often divided along regional or ethnic lines. Planting trees, spreading straw, building the future, these became acts of shared identity. People began to speak of themselves not as victims of the desert, but as guardians of the soil. The narrative of Burkina Faso changed from one of loss to one of defiance. Yet even as pride spread, questions lingered. Could the system withstand years of drought? Could an economy built on fragile gains survive the pressures of global markets? Could a leader hailed as a hero of the land maintain support in the face of political rivalries, and international scrutiny? The answers were not yet clear. But one truth was undeniable. The sands no longer had the final word. The people of Burkina Faso had written themselves back into the story of their land. And for that, Traoré was not only respected, he was believed. But as the nation rebuilt its fields, the eyes of the world turned towards Ouagadougou. Regional powers, international organizations, and distant superpowers all began to weigh their responses. The battle against the desert was not fought in isolation. It was part of a global stage where politics and survival were entwined. Beyond the borders of Burkina Faso, the story spread like wildfire. What had begun as an experiment in survival became a subject of debate in continental forums, newsrooms, and diplomatic halls. The African Union praised the initiative as a model of resilience, noting that the Great Green Wall, a continental project long delayed, now had a real example to follow. In meetings from Addis Ababa to Abuja, leaders pointed to Traoré's methods as proof that African solutions could answer African challenges. ECOWAS, though often preoccupied with political transitions and security concerns, could not ignore the impact. The organization's reports highlighted how stabilizing the land also stabilized communities, reducing migration pressures and conflicts over dwindling resources. To them, the lesson was clear. Environmental security was national security. Europe watched with mixed emotions. The European Union, which had invested heavily in climate initiatives across Africa, lauded the results but also saw them as a challenge. How could a nation with scarce resources achieve in a few years what billion-dollar projects had struggled to deliver? Editorials in European newspapers called Traoré the unlikely innovator, a man whose defiance of conventional wisdom demanded attention. The United States, too, was compelled to respond. Washington policy circles spoke cautiously, acknowledging the achievement, but wary of its political undertones. Analysts debated whether Traoré's rise signaled a broader shift, a new assertion of African sovereignty that would no longer rely on aid alone. While official statements framed the effort as a remarkable environmental step, think tanks described it as part of a deeper transformation, one that some even labeled a Burkina Faso revolution in both soil and spirit. Media coverage amplified this narrative. Documentaries showcased the straw lattices shimmering under the sun, seeds sprouting within them like tiny sparks of defiance. Headlines hailed Burkina Faso as a climate laboratory, a place where the improbable had become reality. International NGOs that once dismissed the plan now competed to partner, eager to learn from what they had overlooked. And yet, with recognition came pressure. Global attention invited expectations, demands, and scrutiny. Could Burkina Faso sustain its momentum? Could other nations replicate the model? Or was it tied uniquely to Traoré's leadership and the will of his people? The questions echoed far beyond Ouagadougou. Burkina Faso had proven that dignity and ingenuity could defy the desert. But the world wondered, could this spark ignite a movement that reshaped not just a nation, but the entire continent? The battle against the desert was never meant to be easy. For all its victories, Burkina Faso still faced a horizon filled with uncertainty. Climate change loomed like a shadow, threatening to undo years of progress with longer droughts, harsher winds, and unpredictable seasons. International politics, too, added complexity. Every success attracted allies, but also scrutiny from those who doubted or feared a model of self-reliance. Inside the country, the work was far from over. The straw lattices and the green shoots they nurtured were fragile. They required care, maintenance, and commitment. Traoré knew that vision alone could not carry the nation forward. It would take generations of hands to keep the soil alive. The movement had to grow deeper than policy, deeper than leadership. It had to become culture. And yet the opportunities were vast. If Burkina Faso could expand its reclaimed lands, food security would no longer be a dream, but a foundation. If its methods could be shared with neighbors, entire stretches of the Sahel could be reborn. Roads and railways, once buried beneath sand, could become arteries of trade, binding nations together not in poverty, but in partnership. For every stalk of straw placed on the desert floor, there was a story of defiance that could inspire beyond borders. The greatest gift of this struggle was not only the land regained, but the mindset reshaped. A people who had once seen themselves at the mercy of the desert now saw themselves as architects of the future. They had proven that scarcity did not mean surrender, that waste could be turned into wealth, that even in the harshest conditions, dignity could take root. As dust settles over the fields where children now play, the vision of Ibrahim Traoré lingers like a flame. The road ahead is uncertain, but it is a road of their choosing. What began as a desperate fight for survival has become a journey of sovereignty. And yet, the greatest question remains unanswered. If one small landlocked nation can wrestle life from death, what stops the rest of the world from doing the same? Burkina Faso is no longer defined solely by its deserts. It is defined by its courage, its vision, and the hands that refuse to bow to impossible odds. The sands that once swallowed dreams now cradle life. Proof that determination and ingenuity can transform the fate of an entire nation. Ibrahim Traoré coup was not just a shift in leadership, it was a shift in destiny. Where others saw failure, he saw opportunity. Where the world expected despair, he offered hope. Through dead plants, golden straw, and tireless communities, he forged a new blueprint for survival. One rooted in dignity, sovereignty, and the belief that scarcity is never an excuse for surrender. The impact resonates far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. The Burkina Faso Revolution is not only a story of trees or soil, it is a narrative of resilience that inspires the global fight against climate change. It challenges nations, large and small, to consider, if one landlocked country can reclaim its future from the desert, why can the rest of the world not do the same? For the people of Burkina Faso, this is more than an environmental victory. It is a triumph of unity, of shared responsibility, and of faith in collective action. Every seed planted, every stalk laid, and every patch of green is a testament to what is possible when vision meets courage. So do not turn away. Witness a story where a coup became a catalyst for revolution, where a nation's struggle against the desert became a beacon for all. Subscribe, share, and stand with Burkina Faso, because the lessons of Ibrahim Traoré coup and the Burkina Faso Revolution are lessons for every human heart seeking hope, dignity, and a future worth fighting for.